Our most popular video on YouTube to date is a short that we did looking at a full 16-inch traditional AR, an AR SBR, and a bullpup rifle. We quickly went over the ballistic differences and mainly the length differences with the platforms. But we wanted to give a little bit of a more in-depth look since a lot of people had a lot of different things to say about all the different platforms. We were inundated with comments, over 300 plus comments on this particular video, with a lot of people giving their opinions on bullpups, giving their opinions on us, and everything in between. It was truly some great dialogue. There were a lot of great points that were brought up that we didn't really have time to address in a short little 50-second video, so now is the time that we will dive in deeper. Now, one of the best parts of the bullpup is the length. The overall length of a bullpup rifle versus an SBR are quite similar. As you saw in our short, the SBR with a suppressor is obviously still longer than a 16-inch bullpup rifle with a suppressor. In fact, the suppressed bullpup rifle with a 16-inch barrel is shorter than a 10.5 traditional AR style SBR. I wanted to give a little caveat here. We're going to be jumping between clips of AR pistols and AR SBRs. We're not trying to say that AR pistols are SBRs. What we are trying to say is that the length of the two are quite similar. Now, the bullpup might offer a nice, small, compact package with a full-length rifle barrel. But everything isn't all sunshine with the bullpup. There are several major drawbacks for the bullpup rifle design in general that take away from a lot of its strengths. Let's go over some of those. Let's go over the actual barrel itself. A bullpup, if you're unfamiliar, has a 16-inch barrel, but crams it into the space that a traditional AR with a 10.5-inch barrel would take up, making the gun much more compact. Now, the barrel length is pretty important for a caliber like 5.56 223. Now, although the muzzle velocity between a 16-inch barrel and a 10.5-inch barrel is relatively mild, only 300 or so feet per second, that is exacerbated at distance, especially if you're trying to engage a target at distance. And it becomes very difficult because you're losing velocity, you're losing accuracy, because of the shortened barrel. You do get the plus of the gun being overall shorter. With a bullpup, it looks like they solved that issue. The gun is overall short, and you still get a very effective muzzle velocity, which extends out to range. But what are some of the downsides of the bullpup rifle? Well, we don't have to look far to start to find the downsides. Number one is the rail space. Bullpup rifles are much more compact than traditional rifles, and thus the rail space on the bullpup is significantly smaller. Now, oftentimes this isn't a massive deal because most people will still be able to attach lights, foregrips, slings, etc. But for anyone who's maybe using something like a PEC box or a MAW or some sort of IR device, or maybe wants a bigger light, you're going to start running into issues because the space on the end of the rifle is just not ample enough. Now, in this video, you're seeing footage of the MDRX from Desert Tech, so we're really going off of this gun's rail space. However, with most bullpups, including the Tabor, the AUG A3, any other gun like that, they generally have pretty poor rail space. You can see that you have 3 slots of M-LOK on this bullpup from Desert Tech. And on this AR, you can see you have much more rail space. So SBRs or AR pistols definitely get one over on the bullpups in terms of rail space. Let's talk about the trigger for a minute. A lot of people were leaving a lot of comments on our bullpup short, talking about the triggers of bullpups being trash. They said that they were garbage, that they were no good, saying that it was like squeezing sand through a super soaker, etc., etc., etc. The fact of the matter is that I can't speak to triggers of all bullpups. And with that being said, I can only tell you really firsthand how the MDRX is. But the triggers on the Tavor, triggers on the AUG, any other bullpup, generally are pretty bad. This is just the way that bullpups work. Because your fire control unit is behind the trigger, you have to have a long linkage bar connecting the two together. Unlike on an AR-15 where your trigger is essentially interfaced directly into the fire control group, it's not that way on a bullpup, and that leads to a lot of inconsistencies in the triggers. With that being said, Desert Tech has done a fantastic job making sure the trigger in their MDR is phenomenal. It's very good for a bullpup trigger. Desert Tech, if you're unfamiliar, is best known for their precision rifles that are also bullpups and happen to be bolt action as well. And so they've really figured out how to do the trigger pretty well. The trigger on other bullpups I'm sure is passable and usable, but the trigger on the MDRX far exceeded my expectations of bullpup trigger. For something really easy to compare it to, you can look at something like the PSA enhanced 2-stage trigger unit. It's a slight upgrade from mil-spec, but isn't quite at the Geissele level. So that's about where the MDRX trigger sits. It's not the best, it's not the worst, it's just a bit above mil-spec. So even if you get a bullpup that has a passable trigger in it, you run into the issue of not being able to upgrade that trigger. On a standard traditional rifle, AR, or even AKs, you can very easily upgrade the trigger unit and make a 2-stage trigger a single-stage trigger. You can mess around with the different weights of triggers. You can put very nice triggers in it. You can't really do that on the bullpups. The reason is because it's a lot more in-depth of a process. And even putting a new trigger in, they just function differently with the linkage arm. So a lot of people on our bullpup video were talking about the trigger. And something that was brought up a lot is that bullpup triggers are bad and you can't hit anything out past 100 yards. So we're going to test this theory out. I am shooting an MDRX. It's on the ground, and we're going to go ahead and give this a shot. We are at 300 meters, and we're going to see the hits that we can get. Yeah, this MDRX is really not bad. I mean, 2.5 power is kind of hard to hit targets at 300 yards. You know, a lot of that was me just because I was shooting from a relatively unstable shooting position. 2.5 power optic doesn't really give me the best vantage point, and the ACSS reticle on 2.5 power, the little BDC bullet drop compensator that's built in with the little dots is pretty much impossible to see. So not only do most bullpups have pretty bad triggers, they also don't really lend themselves very well to being upgradable in the trigger department. Let's move on to another thing that a lot of people brought up. We said that bullpups have ergonomic weirdness, and it's true, they do. A lot of people challenged us saying that it was just because we didn't train very much with the bullpups, or we're not used to bullpups yet, or there's nothing inherently ergonomically weird about a bullpup. And I have to disagree a bit. While it is true, I've been using my Desert Tech for about 7 or so months. That's a lot different than 5+ years of shooting AR style rifles and just traditional rifles in general. So I will concede that my training level isn't up to snuff with the bullpup rifle, but it is still ergonomically weird. While the Desert Tech that you're seeing obviously has controls that are very reminiscent of an AR, you have a much different reload procedure with it. Instead of reloading in front of your trigger hand, you reload behind it. It can be very strange. Another issue that I've seen with bullpups is reloading while in the prone. It is difficult with any rifle that you have just by the nature of the rifle, but it seems to be a little bit more difficult with a bullpup because of where that magazine sits. On top of that, probably the biggest ergonomically weird thing about the bullpup rifle is the fact that it's not very conducive to left-handed shooters. Now, we are shooting in this video the side eject version of the MDRX, and they do make a forward ejecting version. Forward ejecting in bullpups has been a way that companies have tried to get around the fact that left-handed shooters often have trouble using bullpups. The way it works is it essentially takes the empty brass out of the chamber, puts it into a chute on the side of the rifle where it's going to eject from, and then uses the bolt itself as it's closing on the next round to fling the empty case forward out of the chute. In theory, this works very well. In practice, not so much. You're adding another point of failure in ejection. In most guns, and pretty much every gun besides bullpups, the casing is ejected straight out of the action outside of it, not into a separate tube which it then sends it out of the rifle. With this added complexity, you see a lot of issues with brass getting stuck in this chute. Another issue is oftentimes it does obscure your vision into the chamber of the gun, making it difficult to diagnose malfunctions. Now, I know what you're probably saying. A lot of modern bullpups allow you to switch the side of the ejection. Whether that means moving the ejection port to the other side or taking the bolt out of the gun, swapping the extractor and ejector, swapping the ejection port, and putting it all back together, I will concede that you are able to switch the ejection port on modern bullpups relatively easily. But the issue is that unlike a traditional rifle, you can shoot it left or right-handed at any time you so choose. On a bullpup, you don't have necessarily that option. Well, I take that back. On a bullpup, you can do that, but your gun will always eject one way, whether it's on the left or whether it's on the right. It doesn't matter. It will always eject that one way. In traditional rifles, that doesn't really matter because it's ejecting far enough away from your face. It doesn't cause an issue if you're left-handed. But with a bullpup, when your face is right next to the chamber, you will notice that you will get hit with brass in the face occasionally. Now, this isn't enough to cause any pain or leave any marks or anything crazy, but it is enough to become an annoyance. And with that being said, that is part of the ergonomic weirdness that we're talking about. Bullpups are relatively rare. They're relatively, I wouldn't say that they're relatively new, but they've become more commonplace as of recently, especially with the good old ATF. With that being said, most people are trained using traditional rifles because they're just that, traditional. A lot of people aren't trained on bullpup rifles. And while you can train yourself on a bullpup rifle, why waste the time training a new weapon system whenever you can use a perfectly functional weapon system that you already have and you already know inside and out? A lot of people might try and do that. In fact, that was the whole impetus of making this video. I was trying to do that. Moving away from ergo, we'll go into the stock/length of pull issue with bullpups. Now, this can affect the ergonomics of the gun as well. And for someone like me, I have super long arms. I can feel very scrunched up on the bullpup versus a traditional rifle. The bullpup doesn't have an adjustable stock. There might be ways to jerry-rig it where you can add extensions to your butt plate or something. I'm not sure, but a stock MDRX or stock bullpup doesn't have an adjustable stock really. And that can cause an issue. Because, like I said, I have super long arms, so I require a little bit longer length of pull than maybe someone who is shorter. Maybe someone is 5'5", 5'6", and they're trying to use a rifle. It might be a lot easier for them to use an AR-style rifle that has an adjustable stock so that they can change the length of pull to fit them. It is extraordinarily easy to do on an AR, and even nowadays some modernized AKs. This can also give you sort of a strange ergonomic issue. So, with all that being said, what role do bullpups serve in the grander scheme of things? Well, that really is up to you. If you're someone who wants something that is extremely compact, Bullpups will always be the shortest option. There's just no way around it. Like I said, a 10.5 AR is still longer than a 16-inch bullpup with a suppressor. You can really shrink down the overall size, and that is huge for a lot of people. If you're willing to build or buy an SBR, that's totally fine, but some people might not want to necessarily do that, but still want to have a small, compact package, and that's where the Bullpup really shines. Overall, I think that the Bullpup really has one main driving feature that really pulls in customers, and that is the compactability and the size. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. If you're interested in seeing more from our channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next video. Peace.